Archaeological excavations carried out in the 20th century in the Iraqi deserts have lifted the veil of mystery surrounding the true appearance of Babylon. Traces of technologies were found in the ruins that, according to modern understanding, could not have been created thousands of years ago. Such findings cast doubt on traditional ideas about the development of humanity and force us to reconsider the capabilities of ancient civilizations. Could the builders of that time have possessed knowledge that allowed them to use the laws of physics to create comforts that we today consider to be the result of modern achievements? The answer to this question could turn legends into reality and demonstrate that our ancestors possessed secret knowledge. For a long time, scientists were convinced that the development of humanity was simple and linear. It was believed that the Greeks and Romans were the peak of development, and that before them lived practically savage people. Previously discovered similar artifacts were considered anomalies or errors in dating. In the mid-19th century, the situation began to change. Reports appeared of finds in ancient layers, the age of which caused fierce controversy. The finds became more and more numerous, and people realized that history was probably missing something. The decisive discovery was made in Mesopotamia. In 1936, near Baghdad, archaeologist Wilhelm Koenig discovered a clay pot with a copper tube and an iron rod. He suggested that it was an ancient battery. Some researchers have put forward a bold hypothesis about the possible use of such vessels for primitive gilding. All these discoveries force us to admit that ancient civilizations possessed knowledge that we are only beginning to comprehend. Among the exciting finds made by archaeologists was a system of pipes under the foundation of the main palace. They discovered a network of fired clay pipes laid with remarkable precision. Although science claims that ancient people dumped waste into the streets or used open ditches, and that sewage and water supply systems appeared in Rome many centuries later, one of the expedition's engineers decided to demonstrate how this system worked. He noted that the pipes were joined with a sealant made from natural resin. This allowed water to flow under pressure. This means that thousands of years before the emergence of modern cities, the inhabitants of Babylon were already able to enjoy comfort. Archaeologists discovered a house that once belonged to a wealthy merchant. In one of the rooms, they found glass plates. They were perfectly transparent and had a slight thickening in the center. It is known that in academic circles, ancient glass is considered to have been cloudy and heterogeneous. Scientists claim that people only learned to make lenses in the Middle Ages. But when one of the archaeologists placed one of the plates on a clay tablet with small text, the letters on it instantly enlarged and became clearly legible. This magnifying glass was created by a craftsman whose understanding of the laws of optics anticipated the emergence of physics as an independent science. This tiny artifact changed our understanding of how ancient scientists understood the world and the stars. Archaeologists made a discovery that astonished researchers. Metal tools in one of the craft workshops. The saws and drills were made of an alloy that had not corroded over thousands of years. It was believed that hard stones, such as granite, were processed by simple friction or with the help of ordinary sand. However, the marks on the Babylonian slabs told a different story. Deep, even grooves are clearly visible on the stone, which could only have been made by a very hard metal rotating at high speed. One stone processing expert claimed that such marks are left by a modern milling cutter. The hypothesis of the use of mechanical labor in ancient times could radically change our understanding of the history of technology. During the inspection of the workshops, the team discovered a strange mechanism consisting of bronze gear wheels. It was obviously part of some kind of computing device. Modern textbooks claim that the first complex mechanisms appeared only in Europe during the Renaissance. At the same time, historians believe that ancient people were limited in their capabilities, building only levers and simple blocks. However, this device shows that Babylon was home to engineers capable of designing machines to calculate planetary trajectories. Such discoveries raise serious questions for researchers. Each such artifact serves as a reminder that we greatly underestimate our ancestors. Continuing their excavations in the center of Babylon, archaeologists discovered a history hidden not only underground, but also beyond the familiar walls. One of the old workers once showed the professor a place where a deep gully had formed after a heavy rainstorm. At the bottom of the ravine, the edge of a huge slab covered with a layer of natural resin was visible. The old man whispered that his grandfather called this place the House of Silence, where, according to him, ancient priests kept the voice of the heavens. After moving the slab, the team discovered a narrow passage leading to a room with excellent acoustics. Tall clay jugs stood along the walls, their necks facing the center of the room. Official science usually claims that such vessels were used exclusively for storing grain or wine. Historians working at universities are convinced that the architecture of Babylon was designed to demonstrate external luxury. However, in this room, everything was different. Even the quietest word uttered by a person standing in the center was amplified many times over and sounded as if it had been spoken by a powerful loudspeaker, returning to him. The angles of the walls and the shape of the vessels amazed the expedition's engineers with their precision. Sound was important to the Babylonians in their daily lives. Such rooms could be used for important city meetings and courts, where the judge's voice had to be clearly heard by all present without effort. This was due to the laws of physics and was aimed at a more organized existence in a huge city. While studying the lighting of the Babylonians' huge buildings, archaeologists came across another strange story. For a long time, scientists racked their brains over how people worked in deep halls without windows. It is believed that the ancient inhabitants used torches or oil lamps. But scientists did not find a single trace of soot on the ceilings of Babylonian buildings. If torches had burned here for years, the stones would certainly have darkened. Ignoring this fact, historians argue that the walls could have simply been cleaned frequently. During the study, one of the team members discovered the remains of a system of polished bronze mirrors. The mirrors were mounted on movable supports. A beam of light directed from the street to a specific place in the corridor was transmitted by the mirror system to the most remote rooms of the underground. This ancient light-conducting system allowed the underground chambers to be filled with bright daylight. This discovery explains why the daily life of the Babylonians seemed so clean and bright. They did not light up the sky with fire, but directly made the sun come to visit them. Studying the daily life of the townspeople proved to be particularly fascinating. In one of the houses, archaeologists discovered an unusual stone bathtub with two pipes attached to it, one at the top and one at the bottom. The official version is that ancient people poured water from basins over themselves. It is believed that heating water in the past was a laborious and lengthy process. However, under the floor of this bathtub, researchers found a chamber designed for smoldering coals. After a hard day's work, a Babylonian could relax by taking a hot bath. All he had to do was light a small fire in the compartment designed for this purpose. The mystery of the finds was evident even in the simplest objects. For example, a copper cauldron was found in the kitchen of one of the houses, the walls of which were covered with a thin layer of silver. Today's science explains this as a decorative ornament. However, from a practical point of view, silver has antibacterial properties and can keep water fresh for longer. Consequently, the ancient housewives of Babylon knew about the properties of metals and used them to protect their families from disease. In their daily lives, they not only cooked food, but also applied their knowledge of chemistry. This story, told near Babylon, demonstrates how often we look down on our ancestors. However, when you see their water pipes, mirrored lamps and heating systems, it becomes clear that their daily life was organized much more rationally and ecologically than ours. We have discovered not just ruins, but traces of a civilization that knew how to exist in harmony with nature, using its intelligence to create comfort without destroying everything living around it. In order to understand how the findings under Babylon are rewriting history, it is necessary to view them as evidence of an extremely high level of engineering thought. Each new discovery raises serious questions about traditional textbooks, which are accustomed to portraying ancient man as a limited craftsman. Excavations continued, and archaeologists discovered traces of an urban planning system. Along the main roads were the remains of unusual structures made of fired brick, inside which copper rods ran. It is commonly believed in scientific circles that copper in ancient times was used exclusively for the manufacture of jewelry, weapons, or simple utensils. Historians are convinced that any assumptions about the ancient knowledge of electricity or energy transfer are mere speculation. If these copper structures really did protect buildings from lightning or static electricity, it shows that the Babylonians knew about atmospheric physics thousands of years before Benjamin Franklin. This changes our idea of how advanced and sophisticated civilization was in this ancient metropolis. In everyday life, this manifested itself in remarkable precision. In one of the areas where craft workshops were located, scientists discovered a stone processing workshop. The surface of the basalt slabs lying there was polished to a mirror-like shine. Modern research claims that such polishing in ancient times was achieved by many months of manual labor using sand and water. However, when examined under a microscope, microscopic circular marks were found on the stone, which are usually left by a rotating tool. This suggests that the Babylonians had primitive but functional machine tools. If this hypothesis is confirmed, the history of technology will need to be revised. Another fact that casts doubt on old dogmas concerns medicine. Archaeologists discovered a set of narrow-necked ceramic vessels in one of the houses. Examination of their contents revealed the presence of acids and metal salts. Official history claims that chemistry as a science originated only in the Middle Ages, thanks to alchemists. Scientists usually believe that ancient people used only natural materials in their pure form. But these vessels could have been tools for gilding jewelry. If Babylonian jewelers used chemical precipitation of gold rather than simply forging it, this indicates a high level of knowledge about the structure of matter. The life of a wealthy Babylonian was surrounded by objects whose creation required complex laboratory processes that we had not even suspected before. The city's food supply system deserves special attention. Archaeologists have discovered the remains of mechanisms along the canals that use the energy of the river's current. It is officially believed that such complex transmissions only appeared in ancient Greece. However, the Babylonian findings indicate that the automation of field irrigation was commonplace in Babylon. This revises the history of economics. The availability of agricultural machinery could have freed up people's time for the development of science and art. This explains how Babylon was able to become the cultural center of the world, but at the same time raises the question of why these technologies did not become more widespread. The mystery of the finds lies not in their appearance, reminiscent of space technology, but in their logic and relevance to everyday life. Devices for observing shadows were found in ordinary residential buildings. We tend to think that for ancient people, time was a vague and elastic concept. However, Babylon demonstrates that their lives were clearly structured and governed by mathematical laws. If we take these facts as a basis, history will no longer seem like a slow and painful ascent. It will turn into a series of bright flashes. Babylon became one of those flashes, when people were able to create a comfortable and technologically advanced life using simple materials. Our ancestors followed their own path, and this path was significantly more progressive than what is presented to us in traditional textbooks. Continuing their research, archaeologists delved deeper into the study of Babylonian life, examining it at the level of entire neighborhoods. Among the most significant finds was a ventilation system that stretched underground throughout the city. Traditionally, science believed that ancient megacities were poorly ventilated places where people suffered from overheating and unpleasant odors. In academic circles, it is commonly believed that ventilation in ancient times depended solely on open windows and doors. Near Babylon, researchers found a network of vertical shafts running deep underground and connecting to horizontal tunnels. There was always water in the depths of these shafts, coming from underground waterways. When hot desert air entered the shaft, it was instantly cooled by contact with the water and forced under pressure into the living quarters through openings in the floor designed for this purpose. The air conditioning system operated without a motor, protecting the city's inhabitants from the exhausting heat. People could enjoy the coolness of their homes. This technology radically changes our understanding of the architecture of the past, demonstrating that the Babylonians mastered the art of airflow control with the same precision as modern engineers. The mystery of this discovery was further compounded when the remains of unusual filters were found in the ventilation shafts. They consisted of several layers of copper mesh and palm fibers impregnated with an antiseptic solution. Science usually claims that the concept of air hygiene only emerged in the 20th century. It is believed that ancient people had no idea about dust and microbes carried by the wind. However, these filters indicate that the Babylonians cared about the quality of the air they breathed. They consciously purified it of sand and impurities. This civilization, prioritizing human well-being and health, applied achievements in biology and physics to this end. During excavations of the shopping arcades, archaeologists discovered a structure that appears to have served as an ancient archive or bank. Thousands of clay tablets were found inside, but researchers focused their attention not on them, but on the construction of the shelves. The shelves were made of fired wood, covered with a special varnish that did not ignite. Researchers tried to set fire to a piece of this varnish and found that it only darkened slightly. The inhabitants of Babylon already knew how to protect valuable documents from fires, which were a frequent occurrence in densely populated cities. The life of a Babylonian official or banker was surrounded by objects designed to ensure the preservation of information. They were not limited to writing on clay, but created entire security systems. In the same building, unusual seals made of an alloy of metals were discovered, which could not be forged by ordinary casting. Each seal had a unique pattern, representing an ancient protection against counterfeiting, a kind of analogue of a holographic sticker of that time. This discovery requires a revision of the history of criminology and law, as it demonstrates that Babylon's financial system had more sophisticated and reliable protection than previously thought in academic circles. Moving towards the outskirts of the city, archaeologists stumbled upon the remains of an irrigation system that supplied water not only to agricultural land, but also to the gardens of the townspeople. Modern research shows that irrigation in Mesopotamia was quite primitive. Slaves drew water from springs with leather bags and poured it into ditches. Historians believe that this was a laborious and inefficient task. A system of automatic gates was discovered near Babylon, which were activated when the water in the canal reached a certain level. When the water level rose, a float acted on a lever, causing the gate to open and water to flow to the desired area. As the level dropped, the system automatically closed. This design allowed gardens to be watered around the clock without human intervention. The life of the Babylonian gardener was automated. Thanks to this, the city turned into a blooming oasis surrounded by greenery in the middle of a lifeless desert. This discovery revises our understanding of agricultural history. The greatest mystery was presented by the findings in one of the foundations, where a time capsule was discovered. Inside was a drawing of the city made on a thin sheet of bronze. It showed the lines of communication that archaeologists were still planning to explore. However, the most surprising thing was that the scale of the map was accurate to within a millimeter. Science claims that ancient maps were mostly schematic and inaccurate. This bronze plate refuted that claim. The Babylonians possessed surveying methods that allowed them to perceive the city as a single whole, as if observing it from a height. At the end of this stage of work, the researchers stumbled upon a store of writing instruments. Among the familiar clay sticks were unusual feathers with metal tips that had a cavity for ink. The predecessors of modern fountain pens did not appear until the 19th century. However, Babylonian scribes could write continuously for hours without leaving the parchment or leather. This circumstance rewrites the history of writing and education, demonstrating that the speed of information dissemination in Babylon was significantly higher than we usually assume. All these discoveries, from fireproof varnishes to automatic watering devices, paint a picture of a world where humans did not exist as slaves to nature. They were its allies, skillfully applying the laws of physics to their own needs. The history of humanity, as it is presented to us today, seems incomplete and distorted. Revealing its secrets under the feet of archaeologists, Babylon demonstrates that progress is not only about electricity and the internet, but also about the mind's ability to find solutions to the most complex problems in the simplest and most effective ways. Walking along ancient cobblestones, archaeologists discovered a residential building that was preserved in the best condition compared to others. An object was found in it that looked like an ordinary kitchen tool. It was a massive stone slab with a smooth depression and a heavy cylinder. As a rule, academic science interprets such finds as grain grinders, claiming that the life of ancient women consisted of continuous and hard grinding of grain by hand. According to scientists, this was exhausting work that took a lot of time. However, upon closer inspection, traces of a drive belt attachment were found on the cylinder's axis. As it turned out, this mill was part of a mechanical unit that could be driven by either domestic animals or a water wheel installed in the yard. The user only had to pour in the grain, and the mechanism did the rest of the work. It was an ancient appliance that freed up time for other activities, such as raising children or teaching. It is clear that even in ordinary families, time and human labor were valued, and engineering thought was directed towards simplifying daily tasks. This shows that progress in ancient times extended not only to palaces and temples, but also penetrated every corner of everyday life. In the storeroom of the same house, researchers found airtight vessels made of unusual ceramics covered with glaze on the inside. When one of these containers was opened, it was found to contain oil that had retained its properties for thousands of years. The official history of medicine and chemistry asserts that long-term preservation of food without the use of modern additives and vacuum packaging is impossible. For this reason, it is believed that ancient people experienced problems with food quality. The Babylonians used natural resins and a special mineral composition introduced into ceramics for preservation. It was practical biology, which was part of the daily life of an ordinary family. The floor in the bedroom of this house attracted particular attention. It was two-layered, and the spaces between the bricks contained burnt remains of herbs and charcoal. According to modern scientific understanding, in ancient times, heating was limited to hearths located in the center of the room. The open, warm floor system indicates that the Babylonians understood the principles of convection. Hot air from a small stove installed outside the dwelling circulated under the floor, heating the beds without polluting the air inside the room. This level of comfort, which we today perceive as a sign of elite housing, was commonplace for the inhabitants of Babylon, a standard of quality of life. The mystery of these findings lay in their abundance. In a neighboring block, archaeologists discovered a shoemaking workshop. There they found sandals with shock-absorbing soles, equipped with layers of springy cork and thin copper wire. The scientific community claims that ancient shoes were flat and harmful to the foot. Orthopedics, as a science, supposedly only appeared in the last 100 years. Babylonian shoemakers made shoes that took into account the strain on the spine that occurred during long walks on stone pavements. The discoveries in Babylon are forcing us to rethink our understanding of history. It was previously believed that the ancient world was an era of manual labor and superstition. But now we see that our ancestors had significant technological achievements. The realization that thousands of years ago people used gas lighting systems and complex mechanisms radically changes our understanding of historical chronology. It turns out that the industrial and scientific revolutions did not originate in Europe a couple of centuries ago, but began in ancient times, although much of this knowledge was subsequently lost or forgotten. These discoveries change our view of history, transforming it from a straight line of progress into a series of ups and downs. They show that humanity had already achieved high standards of living and comfort without resorting to the use of electricity or oil. Such data forces scientists to abandon the idea that ancient civilizations were merely a stepping stone to our time, and to recognize them as independent and developed worlds. The history of Babylon shows that great knowledge can be lost if it is not cherished, and that we, living today, are not the first to use the forces of nature to create a comfortable life.